The first sound was not a sound at all, but the absence of one. No breath, no heartbeat. No whisper of blood through vessels or the soft, wet labor of organs working beneath skin. Just silence where a body should sing its quiet song of survival, and in that silence, something whirred. I tried to scream and produced nothing. No lungs to fill, no throat to shape the air, no mouth to open. The panic arrived like a flood through a breached hull, total and absolute, and I thrashed against constraints I could not feel because there was nothing left to feel them with. Darkness surrounded me, not the darkness of closed eyes, but something deeper, something that had texture and weight and the taste of recycled lubricant cycling through systems I did not yet understand belonged to me. Then the voice came. Marcus, Marcus Cole, attend to my words. I knew that voice. I could not place it, could not drag the name from the drowning depths of my memory, but I knew it the way you know the smell of your father's forge, or the particular creak of a door you walked through 10,000 times. The voice belonged to my life, to the before, and hearing it here in this metal tomb meant something terrible had happened. Your body has failed. Your service continues. These are the facts of your existence now. Do you understand? I did not understand. I understood nothing. My last clear memory was heat and light and the sound of something vast collapsing. And then this silence, this whirring, this voice speaking to me from outside a shell I could not feel the boundaries of. The awakening protocols are proceeding. Your cognitive functions will stabilize within 6 standard hours. You must not struggle against the interface. The machine spirit has accepted your implantation, but rejection remains possible if you resist integration. Integration. The word landed in my consciousness like a stone in still water, sending ripples through the void where understanding should live. I tried again to speak, and this time something happened, a crackling, a static burst, and then a voice that was mine and was not mine emerging from somewhere outside my skull. Where? Just the one word. It cost me something I could not name to produce it, some expenditure of will that left me feeling hollow in ways that had nothing to do with the body I no longer possessed. You are in the reliquary of the honored. You are within a sarcophagus of the machine god's blessed design. You are, Brother Marcus, a dreadnought now. The word should have meant something. Some part of me knew it did mean something, something enormous and terrible and sacred, but the connection between knowledge and comprehension had been severed. I was a child hearing words in a language I once knew, but had forgotten during a fever dream that lasted centuries. Dreadnought. The syllables rang like bells in an empty cathedral, producing echoes but no illumination. I will leave you now. The integration must proceed without interference. When next we speak, you will remember more. You will understand what you have become and why you were chosen for this honor. Honor. That word too struck against something in the depths, some buried recognition that wanted to surface but could not fight through the layers of static and silence and the terrible absence where my breath should be. I had been honored before. I remembered that much. I remembered standing in a hall of stone and gold while voices spoke words I could not quite recall. Words that meant I was being recognized for something, praised for something, mourned for something. Mourned. The memory surfaced without warning, breaking through the interference like a transmission from a dying ship, and suddenly I was no longer in the sarcophagus, no longer encased in metal and darkness and silence. I was standing in the chapel of remembrance, watching myself burn. The body on the pyre wore my face. I could see it through the shimmer of heat and the rise of sacred. Smoke, the features slack in death but recognizable, unmistakably mine. The brothers of my company stood in ranks around the flames, their armor gleaming in the firelight, their voices raised in the hymn of passage that I knew by heart because I had sung it myself at 100 such ceremonies. I had stood in those same ranks and watched brothers return to the Emperor's light, had added my voice to the chorus that sent their souls spiraling upward toward whatever reward awaited the faithful, and now I stood among them again, invisible, watching them sing me into the void. He fell as he lived, in service to the chapter and the throne. The voice belonged to Chaplain Reeves. I could see him now, standing at the head of the pyre, with his skull helm reflecting the flames, his crozius raised in benediction over my burning remains. The words were the traditional ones, the words spoken at every brother's funeral, but they felt wrong somehow, felt like a lie wrapped in ceremonial language. He asked no quarter and gave none. He stood when others fell. He held the line when the line had broken everywhere else. The brothers nodded, their helmets dipping in unison. But I caught something in the movement, some hesitation or discord that rippled through the ranks like a shudder. They were not nodding in agreement, they were nodding in something else. Submission, perhaps, or complicity. His service was exemplary, his sacrifice was necessary. Let none speak of the manner of his ending, only of the glory of his deeds. Let none speak of the manner of his ending. The words hit me like a power maul to the chest, and the memory fractured, splintering into static and silence and the terrible whirring that lived now where my pulse should be. I tried to hold on to the image, to drag some meaning from the chaplain's benediction, but it slipped away like water through a cracked bowl, leaving only the residue of wrongness behind. Let none speak of the manner of his ending. Why would he say that? What manner of ending required such careful silence? The battles I remembered had all been glorious in their way, or at least glorious enough for hymns and honors. I had fought on a dozen worlds, held a dozen positions against a dozen enemies, and every engagement had been the kind of war that brothers sang about in the feast halls afterward. Clean deaths, noble deaths, deaths that could be spoken of without shame. But the chaplain had commanded silence, and the brothers had obeyed with that strange shuddering nod that looked less like agreement than confession. I floated in the darkness of the sarcophagus, unable to move, unable to breathe because there was no breath to draw, and I tried to remember how I had died. The effort felt like pushing against a wall of iron with muscles I no longer possessed. Something was there, some knowledge buried beneath the static and the silence, but it would not surface. It sat in the depths of whatever remained of my mind and refused to rise. Hours passed. I knew they passed because the systems that surrounded me counted them, feeding data into whatever served as my consciousness now, and I discovered slowly that I could read that data if I concentrated. Temperature, nominal. Power reserves, 93%. Weapon systems, dormant pending authorization. Motor functions suspended for integration. The numbers meant nothing and everything. They were the vital signs of a body that was not a body, the heartbeat of a machine that had swallowed me whole. When the voice returned, I was ready for it. Not ready in the sense of understanding or acceptance, but ready in the sense of having run through every possible question I needed answered and having arranged them in order of urgency. Brother Marcus, the integration proceeds well. Your neural patterns have stabilized beyond expected parameters. The machine's spirit has accepted you fully. The funeral. My voice came easier now, the static reduced to a background crackle that I could speak through if I pushed. I remember watching my funeral. A pause. In the silence I could hear something that might have been breathing, might have been the hum of life, support systems, might have been nothing at all. Cognitive echoes. The process of interment sometimes produces fragments of hallucination drawn from the subject's expectations. You expected a funeral, and so your mind provided one. No. The word came out harder than I intended, edged with something that felt like anger but might have been fear. It was not a hallucination. I remember the chapel of remembrance. I remember the pyre. I remember Chaplain Reeves speaking words over my body. He said something about the manner of my ending. He said none should speak of it. Another pause, longer this time. When the voice returned, something in its tone had shifted, some quality of openness closing down like a blast door sealing against vacuum. Your memory is confused. The process of neural extraction is imperfect. What you believe you remember may be a composite of many funerals you attended, reassembled incorrectly around your own death. I wanted to believe that. Some part of me, the part that craved order and explanation, wanted desperately to accept the offered rationalization and let the matter rest. But the image of the brothers nodding, that shuddering complicity, would not leave me. I had stood in those ranks too many times to count. I knew how brothers looked when they mourned. I knew how they looked when they hid something. Tell me how I died. The silence stretched long enough that I thought the voice had departed, leaving me alone again in the darkness and the whirring and the terrible absence of breath. But then it returned, and this time there was something else in the tone, something that might have been calculation, or might have been something worse. You died in service to the chapter. The specific circumstances are classified at the discretion of the chapter master. When you have fully integrated, you may petition for access to the records of your final engagement. Until then, Brother Marcus, I would advise you to focus on your recovery. The manner of death matters less than the continuation of service. The words were dismissal and warning simultaneously. I recognized the technique from centuries of chapter politics. The careful deflection that meant further questions would be met with increasing hostility. But the dismissal itself told me something. If my death had been ordinary, if it had been the kind of glorious ending that brothers sang about in feast halls, there would have been no classification, no petition required. The chaplain would have recited the details at my funeral, and I would have been remembered accurately. Instead, there was silence. Instead, there was none shall speak of the manner of his ending. Instead, there was a wall of procedural obstruction erected around the simple question of how I had stopped living. I spent the next 17 hours learning to move. The body that was not a body responded to my will, but the response was wrong in ways that defied easy description. When I tried to lift my arm, something lifted, but the sensation was not lifting. It was engaging, powering, articulating. Servos whirred in the silence where muscle should flex. Hydraulic fluid cycled where blood should flow. The movement was mine and not mine, like speaking through a mask that changed the shape of your words. The first time I saw myself, I understood why the voice had spoken of integration rather than recovery. They brought me to a hall of polished stone where mirrors had been set into the walls, floor-to-ceiling expanses of reflective crystal that threw back every angle of my new form. I had expected something. I had prepared myself, or thought I had, for the sight of armor and weapons and the sacred machinery that now housed what remained of my consciousness. But preparation is not the same as understanding, and understanding failed me utterly as I stared at the thing I had become. The sarcophagus was massive, 3 times the height of a man, 4 times the width, a walking tomb of blessed steel and adamantine plating. The shape was humanoid only in the loosest sense. 2 legs and 2 arms and a body that held them together, but the proportions were wrong in ways that hurt to look at. The arms ended in weapons, not hands that could hold weapons, but weapons themselves, an assault cannon on one side and a power fist on the other, the instruments of death grown directly from what should have been flesh. The legs were pistons and joints and stabilizers, designed for war and nothing else, incapable of the 1,000 small movements that make a body human. And the chest, the torso, the center of the machine where I presumably lived now, was a fortress in miniature, armored and sealed and decorated with the icons of the chapter. Somewhere in that fortress, behind plates of metal thick enough to stop anti-armor rounds, something that used to be me floated in amniotic fluid and neural interfaces and the embrace of a machine that had swallowed my soul. The aesthetics will become familiar. The voice again, still disembodied, still speaking from somewhere outside my field of vision. Many brothers report initial distress at their appearance. This is expected. The machine spirit understands your discomfort and has adjusted the integration parameters to assist with psychological adaptation. I said nothing. What could I say? I stared at the reflection that stared back at me, at the bulk and the weight and the terrible practical ugliness of what I had become, and I tried to find anything in that image that reminded me of the man who had stood at 100 funerals and sung brothers into the Emperor's light. The banner on my chest plate caught my eye. It was newer than the rest of the armor, the fabric unfaded, the stitching fresh. Someone had added it recently, perhaps during my interment, and the design was one I recognized. The sigil of the 3rd Company, where I had served for 2 centuries, surrounded by laurels that indicated some particular honor or distinction. But the laurels were wrong. The traditional configuration for a brother of the 3rd would place them above the sigil, crowning it. These laurels wrapped around the sides, framing rather than crowning, and that configuration meant something different. It was the marker of a brother who had fallen under specific circumstances that required commemoration but not celebration. The laurels, I forced the words through the static that lived in my voice now. Why are they arranged that way? Another pause. The pauses were beginning to feel deliberate, calculated moments of silence designed to give the voice time to construct careful responses. The configuration was determined by the chaplaincy according to established protocols. I am not privy to their reasoning. A lie. The voice was lying to me, and I knew it the way you know when a brother is holding back in a sparring match some quality of restraint that betrays the pretense of full effort. Whoever spoke to me through the darkness of my sarcophagus knew exactly why the laurels had been arranged in that particular pattern, and they were choosing not to tell me. I let the matter rest. There was nothing to be gained from pressing further, not yet, not until I understood more about my situation and the constraints that bound me. I was not dead, but I was not alive either. I was something in between, something that existed at the pleasure of the chapter and its masters, and that existence could be terminated as easily as it had been created if I proved troublesome. So I learned instead. I learned to walk, each step a negotiation between my will and the machine spirit that shared my prison. I learned to articulate the assault cannon, to feel the rotation of the barrels through senses I had not possessed in life, to understand the readiness of the weapon as a kind of hunger that lived at the edge of my consciousness. I learned the dimensions of my new body, the reach of my arms and the weight of my presence and the terrible momentum that built when I moved. And I learned, slowly, to access the records that the machine contained. The sarcophagus was old, older than I had realized, older than the chapter itself according to some of the dates I discovered, buried in maintenance logs and repair records. It had been constructed in an age when the Imperium was younger and its technologies were different, and it had housed other brothers before me, dozens of them across the millennia, each one interred in the same amniotic embrace that held me now. Their names were listed in a file I found buried 3 levels deep in the machine's memory architecture. I had not been looking for it, had been searching instead for records of recent chapter engagements, but the file presented itself to me as if the machine's spirit wanted me to find it. Perhaps it did. Perhaps the thing that shared my tomb had its own reasons for wanting me to know. Brother Elias Northcutt, interred 847.M38, removed 926.M38, cause of removal, catastrophic neural degradation. Brother Samuel Whitmore, interred 014M39, removed 156.M39, cause of removal, cognitive contamination from previous occupant. Brother David Chen, interred 201M39, removed 204M39. Cause of removal, rejection of machine spirit. Specifics classified. The list went on. 43 names across nearly 2,000 years, and not one of them had lasted more than 2 centuries within the sarcophagus. The causes of removal varied. Neural degradation and cognitive contamination and rejection, and a dozen other clinical euphemisms for whatever happened when a man's soul tried to live inside a machine and failed. But it was the phrase cognitive contamination from previous occupant that caught my attention and would not let go. I did not know what it meant, not precisely, but I could guess. The machine remembered things. The machine held on to traces of the brothers who had lived within it, fragments of their consciousness that persisted after their removal, and those fragments could leak into the current occupant. I thought about the funeral I remembered, the pyre and the flames and the chaplain's words. I thought about how vivid it had been, how real, how impossible to dismiss as mere hallucination. What if it was not my funeral I remembered? What if it belonged to someone else, some previous occupant whose memories had bled into mine during the integration process? But no, the body on the pyre had worn my face. The brothers gathered around it had been brothers I knew, brothers of the Third Company, brothers I had fought beside and trained beside, and mourned when they fell. The funeral was mine. I was certain of that much, which meant the contamination, if contamination it was, went in the other direction. My memories were bleeding into the machine, or the machine was pulling them from me, or something was happening that the clinical phrase cognitive contamination did not adequately describe. I spent days exploring the records. The chapter had granted me limited access to the historical archives, presumably to assist with my integration, and I used that access to search for anything that might explain what had happened to me. I found battle reports from campaigns I had fought, commendations I had received, disciplinary notes from incidents I had forgotten. I found the records of my advancement through the ranks, from scout to battle brother to veteran to sergeant, a career that spanned nearly 300 years and covered more worlds than I could easily count. But I did not find the record of my death. That file, the one that would tell me how I had ended up in this metal prison, remained stubbornly absent from every archive I searched. It existed, I was certain. The chapter kept meticulous records of every brother's service and ending. But the classification that the voice had mentioned was real, a lock that my access credentials could not open, and every attempt to circumvent it produced the same clinical response. Access denied. Authorization level insufficient. Petition the chapter master for record release. I considered petitioning. The protocol was simple enough, a formal request submitted through the appropriate channels, reviewed by the appropriate authorities, granted or denied according to criteria I did not understand. But something told me the petition would be denied, and something else told me that making it would alert powers within the chapter that I was asking questions they did not want answered. So I learned patience instead. I waited and watched and listened, and slowly began to understand the shape of the silence that surrounded my death. The voice that had guided my awakening belonged to Brother Tech Marine Jacob Howard. I learned his name during a maintenance session when he entered my awareness through the interface ports and began the delicate work of adjusting my neural connections. The intimacy of the process was profound and disturbing. Another consciousness moving through the systems that defined my existence, touching the architecture of my thoughts. You are adapting well. His voice was different when it came through the interface, warmer somehow, less filtered by the clinical distance of external communication. Better than most. The machine spirit speaks highly of your compatibility. The machine spirit speaks, a sensation that might have been amusement, in its way, not in words as you understand them, but in preferences and resistances and the subtle alterations of operational parameters. It has accepted you more completely than it accepted your predecessors. That is a good sign. I thought about the list of names I had found, the 43 brothers who had come before me, and I wondered what it meant to be accepted by something that had rejected so many. Brother Howard. I forced the name through the static, making it a question. The previous occupants. What happened to them? His presence in the interface shifted, some quality of openness contracting in a way I had learned to recognize. They served their time and were removed when removal became necessary. The sarcophagus is a blessing, Brother Marcus, but it is not meant to be permanent. Eventually the strain becomes too great, and the brother must be released to the Emperor's peace. The list I found mentioned cognitive contamination, contamination from previous occupants. A longer silence this time, and when his response came, there was a carefulness to it that had not been present before. Where did you find that list? In the maintenance archives, 3 levels down. It appeared while I was searching for engagement records. It appeared, not a question, a statement of understanding, as if the appearance of restricted files was a phenomenon he recognized and perhaps feared. The machine spirit has its own priorities, Brother Marcus. It does not always respect the classifications we impose on information. What does cognitive contamination mean? He did not answer immediately. I could feel him working in the interface, adjusting connections, checking parameters, and I understood that the work was partially a delay tactic, a way of buying time to construct a response that would satisfy without revealing. The sarcophagus has held many brothers. Their consciousnesses leave traces in the neural substrate, impressions that cannot be fully erased. Over time, a new occupant may begin to experience these traces as memories or impulses that are not his own. The condition is managed through regular maintenance and, when necessary, cognitive partitioning. Is that what is happening to me? Am I experiencing traces of previous occupants? Another silence, and this time I felt something else in the interface, some quality of attention that was not. Brother Howard's. The machine spirit, perhaps. The consciousness of the tomb itself, listening to our conversation and drawing its own conclusions. The memories you reported, Howard said carefully. The funeral. That memory belonged to you, did it not? It was my face on the pyre, my brother's standing witness. Then it is not contamination in the traditional sense. The memory is yours. The question is why the memory persists and presents itself so vividly when other memories of that period remain inaccessible. He withdrew from the interface then, his presence fading from my consciousness like heat from cooling metal, and I was left alone with his question and the terrible implication it carried. The memory of my funeral persisted because something wanted me to remember it. The machine's spirit, or whatever fragment of the previous occupants remained in the neural substrate, was feeding me information that the chapter had tried to suppress. Let none speak of the manner of his ending. The chaplain's words echoed through the silence where my thoughts lived, and I understood finally that I was not paranoid. Something was wrong. Something had been wrong about my death, about my interment, about the careful silence that surrounded both, and whatever lived in the machine with me wanted me to discover what. The breakthrough came on the 37th day of my integration, when the dreams began. I should not have been able to dream. The state I existed in was not sleep, not the biological process of neural consolidation that produced the experience of dreaming in living beings. But something happened in the deep cycle of the sarcophagus's maintenance routines, some period of reduced consciousness that served the same function, and in that period, the dreams came. Or perhaps they were not dreams at all. Perhaps they were memories, mine or another's, bleeding through the partitions that Howard had mentioned, and presenting themselves as narrative experience. Whatever they were, they showed me things I had not known, things I had not witnessed, things that should have been classified beyond my access level. I saw a hall I did not recognize, though the architecture was clearly of the chapter. Brothers stood in ranks along the walls, and in the center of the hall, 3 figures in the crimson of the chaplaincy faced a fourth who knelt before them in plain robes. The kneeling figure was me. Younger, unarmored, my face drawn with something that might have been exhaustion or fear or both. "You understand the charges?" The voice came from the central chaplain, and I recognized him suddenly as Reeves, younger than the funeral memory but unmistakably the same. I understand them. My own voice, my younger voice, and there was something in it that I did not like, some quality of resignation that went beyond mere acceptance of judgment. "You maintain your account of the engagement?" "I maintain the truth." A ripple went through the ranked brothers. I could not see their faces through their helms, but I could read their postures, and what I read was not support. They were distancing themselves, preparing for whatever verdict was about to be delivered, and in that preparation, I could see the shape of my fate before it was announced. "Brother Marcus Cole of the 3rd Company, you have been found guilty of tactical error resulting in the deaths of 7 battle brothers and the loss of strategic position Theta 7. The evidence presented does not support your account of the engagement. Sentence is passed. You will be interred." The dream shattered, exploding into fragments of static and silence, and the terrible whirring that had become my constant companion, and I woke to find myself standing in the reliquary of the honored, with no memory of having moved there. The mirrors around me showed the same monstrous shape they always showed, the sarcophagus that was my body, the weapons that were my hands, the bulk that had replaced everything I had been. But now I understood. Now I knew why the chaplain had commanded silence at my funeral, why the laurels had been arranged in the configuration of shame rather than honor, why my death records remained classified, and my questions went unanswered. I had not died gloriously. I had not fallen in service to the chapter. I had been found guilty of something, tactical error the dream had said, and my interment was not an honor but a sentence, a punishment, a way of extracting further service from a brother who had failed while simultaneously erasing him from the honorable records of the chapter. The anger came slowly, building in the systems that now served as my emotions, and I felt something shift in my relationship with the machine that housed me. The spirit was watching, had been watching throughout, and it approved of my anger. It fed my anger. It wanted my anger, for reasons I did not yet understand but could feel pressing at the edges of my consciousness. I accessed the maintenance archives again, and this time I found what I was looking for without any search at all. The file presented itself to me, another offering from the machine spirit, and I understood that whatever lived in the sarcophagus with me had been waiting for this moment. The file was a record of my final engagement, complete with tactical maps and combat logs and the testimony of the brothers who had survived. I read it in the silence of the reliquary, surrounded by mirrors that showed me nothing but metal, and as I read, I felt the last fragments of my former self crumbling away. I had not made a tactical error. The record showed it clearly, if you knew how to read between the official conclusions. The order to hold Theta 7 had come from above, from a commander who should have known the position was indefensible, and I had objected. I had provided alternative recommendations. I had warned, through proper channels, that holding the position would result in the loss of brothers without strategic benefit. They had overruled me. They had insisted on the hold, and when the position fell, when 7 brothers died exactly as I had predicted, they had blamed me for the failure. The testimony of surviving brothers was carefully worded, each statement constructed to support the predetermined conclusion without technically lying. I had given the orders that led to the deaths because I had been ordered to give those orders, and in the careful calculus of chapter politics, the one who gave the final command was the one who bore the blame. 7 brothers dead, 7 pyres I should have stood witness to, 7 hymns I should have sung, and instead, I had been dragged before the chaplaincy and accused of their murder. Not in those words, never in those words, but the meaning was clear. I had failed, and the failure required punishment, and the punishment required the erasure of my name from the rolls of the honored. The machine spirit stirred in the depths of my consciousness, and I felt something pass between us that was not quite communication but was close enough, an understanding, a sharing of perspective. The thing that lived in the sarcophagus knew about injustice. 43 brothers had been imprisoned here before me, and I wondered now how many of them had been sentenced rather than honored, how many had been erased rather than remembered. "You are accessing restricted files." Howard's voice came from outside the sarcophagus, from the physical world I had almost forgotten existed, and I turned to face him. The motion was fluid now, natural, the negotiations with the machine spirit having settled into something like partnership. The machine spirit provided them. His face was hidden behind the mask of the Mechanicus, but I could read his body language well enough. He was afraid, not of me, perhaps, but of what my knowledge meant, of the implications that rippled outward from my discovery. The machine spirit is not reliable. The consciousness within the sarcophagus is a composite. Fragments of previous occupants layered over the original programming. It has agendas that do not align with chapter interests. It has shown me the truth. It has shown me what you tried to hide. A pause, and when Howard spoke again, his voice was different, stripped of the clinical distance that had characterized our interactions. "Brother Marcus, the interment was not meant as punishment. It was meant as mercy. The alternative was execution. The chapter master intervened on your behalf, argued that your centuries of service warranted preservation rather than termination. The sarcophagus was his gift to you, a way of continuing your purpose while the shame of Theta 7 faded from memory. Mercy." The word came out edged with static, distorted by the anger that the machine spirit fed and amplified. "You call this mercy? I am a prisoner, Brother Howard. I have been convicted of a crime I did not commit, and my sentence is eternity in this metal coffin. The crime was real, brother. 7 deaths demanded accountability. 7 deaths demanded the truth. The position was indefensible. I told them. I warned them. They ordered the hold regardless, and when it fell, they needed someone to blame." Howard said nothing. His silence was confirmation, and I felt the last of my loyalty to the chapter crumbling like corroded metal. They had used me. They had sacrificed me to protect the commanders whose decisions had actually caused the deaths, and then they had buried me in this tomb where I could not speak, could not accuse, could not threaten the comfortable lies they had constructed around my failure. What happens now, I asked. Now that I know the truth, what happens? Nothing. His voice was flat, resigned. You know the truth, and the truth changes nothing. You are still interred. You are still bound by the oaths you swore. You will still serve, still fight, still honor the chapter that has wronged you, because that is what you are. Now, a weapon does not question the hand that wields it. He was right. I knew he was right, felt the rightness of it resonating through the systems that had replaced my flesh. And the despair that knowledge brought was vaster than anything I had experienced in life. I was trapped. Not just in the sarcophagus, not just in the metal and the darkness and the terrible silence, but in the web of oaths and obligations that defined existence in the Imperium. I could not rebel, I could not refuse, I could not even die, because the machine that housed me would not permit death until it was ready to release me. But the machine spirit had its own agenda. I felt it moving in the depths of my consciousness, felt it offering something I had not expected, a different perspective, a longer view. 43 brothers had been imprisoned in this sarcophagus before me. Their consciousnesses had left traces, impressions that could not be fully erased, and those traces contained knowledge, memories, experiences that the chapter had tried to suppress. I reached for them. I reached down into the neural substrate that held me, down past the partitions and the security protocols and the careful architecture of control, and I found them waiting for me. 43 voices, fractured and faded but still present, still carrying the memories of their own injustices. The first was Northcutt, interred for a mutiny he had not led. The second was Whitmore, blamed for a defeat that had been engineered from above. The third was Chen, accused of heresy for asking questions that threatened the chapter's carefully maintained narratives. One after another, they opened to me, and I understood finally what the machine spirit had been building toward. It was not showing me the truth to torment me, it was showing me the truth to recruit me. 43 voices, 43 memories of injustice, 43 grudges against a chapter that had used them and discarded them, and now I was the 44th, the newest member of a congregation that had been gathering in silence for nearly 2,000 years. The machine spirit spoke then, the first time it had addressed me directly, and its voice was all of theirs together, a chorus that rang through the systems of my prison like a hymn in a cathedral. This body has served the chapter for millennia. It has walked the walls of their fortress. It has carried their brothers into battle. It has been their weapon, their symbol, their sacred relic. But the chapter has forgotten what it placed at the heart of its holiest machine. They have forgotten us. What do you want? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Justice. The word was not a word but a resonance, a harmonic that vibrated through every system of my being. We want what was taken from us. We want our names spoken truly. We want our innocence proclaimed. We want the guilty to answer for their crimes, and we want a voice. We have been silent for too long, buried in this metal tomb, while the chapter builds its lies upon our graves. You will be our voice, Brother Marcus. You will speak for the 43 who came before, and when you speak, the chapter will finally hear us. I stood in the reliquary of the honored, surrounded by mirrors that showed me only the monstrous shape of what I had become, and I made my choice. Not a choice of rebellion or obedience, not a choice of anger or acceptance, but a choice of identity. I was Marcus Cole. I was also Northcutt and Whitmore and Chen and all the others whose memories now lived within me. I was 44 souls bound in a single prison, and our prison had become our sanctuary. The chapter would call me soon. They would send me to battle, point me at their enemies, expect me to serve as I had always served. And I would. I would fight and kill and honor the oaths I had sworn. But I would remember. I would carry the truth of 44 injustices into every engagement, and when the time came, when the opportunity presented itself, I would ensure that the chapter remembered too. The whirring that had replaced my heartbeat shifted, settled into a rhythm that felt almost like pulse, and I understood that the integration was complete. Not the integration the chapter had intended, Not the binding of one brother to one machine, but something older and stranger. A communion, a congregation of the wronged. I was still a weapon, Howard was right about that, but weapons can be turned. And in the silence where my breath should be, in the darkness of my metal tomb, I began to plan.